Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu, and I'm back with another Digimon video. So today I'm going to be doing a topic that has been on my mind because I've been kind of looking forward to Appmon's introduction into the game, and well, we have it, and I played a lot of Appmon, and yeah, Appmon. So they kind of just suck. And it's unfortunate to see that they are just inherently bad by design, and I kind of just wanted to touch on my overall thoughts on Appmon after we've seen a couple of iterations and we're getting a new iteration, but I'm at least going to try to propose some solutions on how to make Appmon a little bit more palatable, so that way we can kind of understand why Appmon are bad in the first place, and what could actually be good about them in the potential future. So, if you want, feel free to leave a like and subscribe if you're enjoying this type of content and you want to see more of it. I really do appreciate it, and feel free to tell me your thoughts about this topic down in the comments below. And with that, let's get started into the deep dive that is Appmon. So, what actually are Appmon? Because some people might be confused because they've never really interacted or heard of what Appmon even are. Some people probably are just gonna think, oh, it's just a kind of Digimon, but they're a little bit more specialized in terms of what they are because they're not actually Digimon, they're another digital life form, and they're in the Appmon universe. So here's a little bit of lore tidbit for you when it comes to what they actually are and what composes what an Appmon is. So there's also currently not that many Appmons. I think there's like just shy of 100 total different Appmons. So it's not like the pool of Appmon is like very big, and obviously this is Bandai, they could always add more later, but the initial onset is there's not that many, and I don't know how much more we're actually going to be getting. But if you want, feel free to check out the anime. The anime is actually a very fantastic watch, very underrated show, and it even has a video game that also has a fan English translation that's being worked on, if not already finished, so you can feel free to check out those two medias if you want to understand and learn a little bit more about Appmon. But I just appreciate what Appmon are as a whole, and I really liked the change of pace that didn't feel completely drastic compared to some of the other iterations of what they tried to do experimenting with what Digimon are. Alright, so speaking of Appmon, we have Appmon in the TCG. So Appmon have two main mechanics to them that are basically based off of what goes on in the show and the games. So those two specific mechanics is going to be the Link ability and App Fuse ability. So these are found specifically on Appmon. Sure, they might be able to experiment them with other types of Digimon later on, but right now it is solely just an Appmon thing. And basically, there's a also subtle mechanic where you can kind of just ignore colors because Appmon all just digivolve off of any Appmon, which I think is kind of cool. It opens up for more flexibility. But outside of that, the other big mechanic that we see on a lot of Appmon is security Digimon, which is kind of cool because I think that's a pretty strong mechanic that's also being underutilized. So it's nice to see that Appmon also have that going for them as well. So, if you want, feel free to pause the video here. You can give a read to some of these slides when it comes to explaining what the mechanics are. I just pulled these right off of the Bandai website for the Digimon TCG. So, by all means, feel free to give them a read. I'll leave each slide up for about 5-ish seconds or so. Alright, so that is pretty much links in a nutshell, everything you need to know on a surface level. So to kind of just boil it down in case you skipped that portion and you didn't actually read any of this and you just want to know like the cliff notes of what links are, basically the easiest way to understand what linking is you pay the link cost on the card, and then on top of that you attach the card sideways onto your Appmon, and then your Appmon is going to be gaining some extra benefits. So the benefits will vary depending on the effect of the level of Digimon and the type of Digimon that you're going to be linking with, because some have abilities that trigger when you link, some have abilities that link and give him an extra ability like a pseudo inheritable. So it really just depends on what the Appmon line is doing and what mechanics they're trying to play with when it comes to how they're utilizing their links. And another easy way to think about it is they're kind of like options in a sense, where options generally have a cost associated to them. You do the thing and then the option goes away. Links sometimes do that, but they also sometimes act like inheritables and can stay and can be used as an additional resource. So I think links as a mechanic is all pretty fine and dandy, and it's very unique and kind of interesting, and it's definitely what I would have wanted to see out of what Appmon is doing as a whole when it comes to fusing lore and mechanics. So the other big mechanic that apps are working with is App Fuse. So this is the one singular slide kind of just explaining all of App Fuse, and this is probably the big portion on what is wrong with Appmon and why Appmon don't necessarily function as a whole when it comes to actually trying to utilize the App Fuse mechanic. It's a great mechanic when it goes in your favor and you use it properly, but that's not necessarily going to be the case. I'll get into that a little bit later, and I feel like App Fuse is one of the big problems that Appmon has in terms of how it actually comes together. So if you didn't read the slide and understand how App Fuse works, again, Cliff Notes TLDR portions right here, where the easiest way to think about it is kind of just like DNA, except instead of needing the secondary Digimon being on the field, you need that secondary Digimon to be linked with your primary Digimon, and then that's going to enable you to be able to App Fuse. And App Fusing is essentially a free action, except it's not necessarily a free action all the time, because the cost of the link is supposed to be what the cost of the evolution actually is when you think about it from a more traditional evolution-based style of gameplay. So if you want to understand like the basics on how an Appmon deck is generally designed, unfortunately Appmons are a little bit more on the linear side because of what is going on inside of Appmon. So you're generally going to have two primary evolution lines. So you're going to have your big boss monster, which the deck is focused on, and then you're going to have the hero, and you're going to have the villain. So everything is going to be stemming from that. So you have the hero, the villain that fuse into the god. And, well, you need to run the subsequent cards that are interacting with the heroes and villains, so that way you could flesh out your deck to make it as consistent and cohesive as it possibly can be, not only from a mechanics perspective, but because of the App Fuse mechanic. So the god has the App Fuse for the hero and villain. Then the villain, you're going to need the subsequent App Fuse cards to actually have the opportunity to be able to App Fuse into the villain if you need to, in case the hero doesn't come online. Then you have the hero and the subsequent cards that interact with said hero, and then you're going to usually have the rest of the level 4s be kind of generic in a sense, where they are going to not have the App Fuse ability, and then you're going to have the primary level 4, the big key one. That's the one that's going to have the App Fuse ability, and because of this specifically, your rookie slots are going to be delegated to the cards that are going to support App Fusing into this primary level 4. Because the whole idea, again, if you're thinking from a stack-based design, is you're going to try to App Fuse into your level 4, then link and App Fuse into your level 5, then link and App Fuse into your level 6. That's kind of just the general flow of how the deck wants to function and how all of the cards and abilities are generally trying to line up. Then when it comes to the tamers and options, this is where things get a little bit less interesting. I mean, I guess less interesting than already being forced to run a very specific subset of Digimon, but usually you're going to be running a tamer that's going to coincide with a rookie that's going to be able to play it out for free, and then you have room for basically kind of just the rest of whatever you feel like you need. So probably a supporting tamer is going to be really good. Then you're going to have your primary option, which is going to function with the mechanics of what the deck's trying to do based on the hero side of its evolutionary line, or its main evolutionary line, if you want to think about it that way. And then you're just going to have basically your pick of whatever other supporting option that you feel like you want to run. So that's kind of just the basis of app deck design in a nutshell, on the very basic fundamental level. When it comes to possible techs, because the deck really doesn't have a whole lot of space for techs, you do have space for some, just not a whole lot, because the core of the deck is going to be basically taking up the vast majority of the deck. But basically, you can pick your filler of level 6 supporting Digimon, because we do have other app gods that you could interact with and just digivolve normally, even if you're not going to be going specifically for the app fuse. That's still a viable ability for you to gain, and with the slew of different god Digimon that we could possibly have, we could have different combinations based on the mechanics that they're playing with. So when it comes to just some of the other cards that you could use to try to support it, basically you're just going to want to go as generic as you possibly can when it comes to trying to make your evolutions a little bit cleaner, trying to dig out your cards, and trying to set up other specific cards. So this is kind of where the problems of Appmon start showing its ugly head. There's a couple of core problems that's wrong with Appmon. Problem number one, as I kind of already started to explain, is the app fuse mechanic. Part of this goes into the fact that any Appmon that has the ability to app fuse naturally has a higher than average evolution cost, which is obviously the balancing choice behind how these cards are designed. And it's not like it's all that bad, because again, the link cost is going to be lower than your average evolution cost when it comes to how you're generally going to be evolving your Digimon into higher stages. And the free aspect of app fuse without any specific setup is basically the hidden cost. So if it costs, let's just say 3 to evolve into a level 5, well, because linking costs 2 off of your level 4s, that makes basically evolving into your level 5 cost 2, which is less than 3, which is your average. But again, the card is balanced with that in mind, in the fact that because it's going to be a 2-color card with the potential of a free evolution, as we've seen with previous Digimon of this caliber, the evolution cost is going to be a little bit higher as a result. So yeah, it's very well balanced in that aspect, but it's how everything plays out, and it's what lies in its execution that's actually the issue. The consistency needed is really big when it comes to how app fuse works, because unlike DNAs, where most of the time you only need to DNA once at a hyper-specific level, and usually DNAs are a little bit more open-ended than app fuse, that's kind of the issue on what app fuse is because it's just strictly asking too much out of the player to be able to turn this mechanic from something mediocre into something actually decent and something we actually want to try to strive and achieve for, which is what a lot of these app decks and app cards are designed to do. So sure, you do have the option to digivolve normally, but again, because of that higher than average digivolution cost, it's just strictly worse to want to do that, and it actually de-incentivizes players and borderline punishes them for attempting to do so, because just the memory you're going to be passing over is too much, and you can't necessarily keep turn to be able to make any kind of reactive type of plays. So there's a lot of issues that lie in that higher evolution cost when it comes to how app fuse works and the balance between that and their naturally high digivolution cost. And this is why, to try to make app fuse more manageable, you need to have some initial setup beforehand, which again has its own costs associated to that, and some decks might need more specific setups than others in order to able to line up particular abilities so that way your app line can function like a normal deck. And again, that's just asking way too much out of the player, especially when they don't necessarily have all the consistency tools to be able to piece that all together in a timely manner before they just straight up lose the game because they can't get their combo or strategy online quick enough. So, to kind of just run a baseline example of this, let's just say you want to get up into a level 6 Digimon, and you're going to end your turn on said level 6 Digimon. Right now, you're at 3 memory, and you only have a level 4 Digimon in your raising area. So, in order for you to get to that level 6 in an Appmon deck, you obviously have to line up at least 1 to 2 App Fuses to be able to get up into that level 6, which off of 3 memory is borderline impossible, and it's highly unlikely, especially in the early to mid stages of the game when the opponent might be able to try to take advantage of knowing your deck's deficiencies. So in a normal deck, this really isn't an issue because off of 3 memory on a level 4 Digimon, you just move up that level 4 Digimon, Digivolve for 3 into a level 5, and then you Digivolve again into the level 6, and then you could pass turn on that level 6 doing whatever it needs to do. So hopefully that level 6 is going to be blowing out the opponent, but the fact that any normal deck can basically achieve this is pretty decent, except Appmon can't. So that kind of just makes Appmon suck by default because you are forced to rely on the App Fuse mechanic to even have a semblance of being able to play your deck, which is a big issue, especially when, as I kind of already was explaining, App Fuse is just fundamentally asking too much out of the players and out of the deck building process in order to function like a reasonable deck. Alright, which brings us into problem number 2. Too many colors. Yes, too many colors actually is a strength and a weakness. So apps being multiple different colors might seem pretty good because you get a wide variety of mechanics being able to toolbox for various different situations, especially since it's all kind of just natively baked into the deck. So it's kind of cool to see all of these different colors being able to be represented in a single deck, but because the deck is also a stack-based deck, it also runs the huge issue of you just fundamentally not being able to run the consistency tools that the average deck can run in order to function like a proper deck. So while it's cool having all of these colors, it's actually doing you a disservice because the deck has too many colors. So apps have their own specific sets of staple options and tamers in order to make sure that they can function, but these generic cards for apps specifically is nowhere near the power level of the other generic color-based tools that the average other deck gets. And it's not like every other deck that isn't just a traditional stack-based deck in a single color or two is a issue, because there's obviously other deck styles that are able to keep up with it, but they also have the tools built into their deck and built into their archetype to be able to keep up with the fact that Bandai knows what these generic tools are doing and the impact that they have on the game. Or at least I would hope that they know that and they're designing these decks around them, which is a little bit unfortunate from a macro level design, but that's a topic for another video. But in regards to what too many colors is doing for apps, even with the 2-color boosts and trainings and other stuff that's going to be coming down the pipeline, usually apps run 3 to 4 colors and have 2 mandatory evolutionary lines to make things even more complicated when it comes to deck space and colors that you're trying to line up in order to actually try to use some of these generic tools. Which brings us into problem number 3, deck space. So, as I kind of was already explaining between points 1 and 2, there's just a lot of deck space that's just eaten up by default because of how apps need to function. So, as I kind of showed you in that base app example, you're going to be basing your deck off of a level 6 Digimon. So, that level 6 Digimon will have an app fuse between 2 level 5 Digimon. Okay. Not a problem there. The problem is then the level 5s also have their own sets of app fuse, so that way if you want to try to efficiently go into those level 5s, otherwise you're paying more for them just digivolving normally. And yes, you could say, oh, but you're supposed to use one of them to link. But again, you have to cover for every base situation when it comes to how deck building works. So you need to prepare for those off situations for when you can't app fuse. And if you're saying, oh, then you just have to line up app fuse better, well, good luck with that. Because a lot of the deck space is just eaten up by the deck itself, which is kind of weird to say. But as I was like trying to get back on track, because the level 5s also have their own sets of app fuse, you're forced to run 2 different sets of level 4 Digimon in some capacity. And then because one of those level 4s is also going to have level 3s that it wants to app fuse with, again, to try to make app fuse as consistent as humanly possible, you're kind of just forced to run the level 3s. So that's already just a lot of cards that you're kind of just forced to run based on the level 6 that you're going to be playing. And let's not even forget about running some generic app staples in order to try to maintain the deck's own play lines and try to optimize on what they are, again, based on the variation of Appmon that you're trying to play. So usually this is going to be your main tamer with a supporting tamer, and then your main option with a supporting option, and all the options are just fundamentally worse when it comes to consistency and cost compared to the contemporaries that most other decks are getting it. But yeah, so this all means that Appmon are kind of xenophobic if you like stop and think about it, where you could run non-Appmon based cards, but then those specific cards that are non-Appmon are harder to dig out, and because again you don't have the opportunity to run some of those generic tools that can search cards generically, it makes it harder to want to run cards that are not inside of the Appmon archetype. So yeah, it's just unfortunate that because of all of these different factors in play, it really doesn't leave Appmon decks with a lot of deck space to work with without making huge sacrifices that could potentially just really make the deck even harder to run for cards that are trying to make the deck easier to run. It's really awkward, I know. And this brings us to the last criticism or problem that I kind of see with Appmon, and I'm sure I could probably find more if I really wanted to, but thinking about my overall experience playing Appmon, this is more of a minor nitpick rather than like an actual hardcore problem that needs to be solved, but definitely could help alleviate some of the issues that Appmon are having if they actually had inheritable effects. So the fourth problem being no inheritable effects is kind of an issue, especially for how the deck wants to be played and how a lot of the cards are more specifically designed. So I get it, we technically have an inheritable, it's literally just off of the level 2, and that's like from a mechanics perspective and a lore perspective, makes perfect sense. Level 2 design for Digimon is kind of boring at this point because most level 2s are kind of unplayable if they aren't adding cards into your hand or saving you on memory. So yeah, it's a little bit unfortunate that we don't have that many utility level 2s that are seeing much play, but that's less of an issue than actually having almost no inheritables everywhere else. So I get it, the idea behind apps is to incentivize using the link mechanic, and the link mechanic is basically the app's pseudo inheritable effects. They have some pretty interesting combo chains to them when it comes to how we could utilize the link abilities, and it has some really good flexibility depending on what Digimon we're going to be linking what with what. So it's a really good mechanic, but I don't think that it replaces inheritables outright. And the fact that if we're comparing Appmon to a normal standard Digimon deck when it comes to how these decks are designed and what they play out, where you're trying to digivolve from your level 2 or 3 all the way up into your level 6, not having inheritables means that you're missing out on a lot of extra potential to be able to shore up some of the deck's overall weaknesses that linking can't necessarily fix all the time, especially since we have to also remember linking does have a cost associated to it most of the time without specific setup, and the specific setup does have its own set of costs associated to it. So you're still paying for your links no matter what, whereas with your evolutions, yes, you're paying for your evolutions, but there's ways to be able to play around with evolutions that is not necessarily afforded to what Appmon can do. So it kind of just, again, makes Appmon look weaker than the average Digimon deck because of the fact that it doesn't have inheritables to help be able to propel some of its abilities forward. And it's not like there's no space for further inheritables, it just sucks that they literally don't have any outside of the level 2. So this all brings into the question on, well, now that we know the issues, what can we actually do to kind of fix these issues and hope to see improvement going forward when it comes to future apps to be able to actually make apps playable? So when it comes to the 4 main issues, the first one, give level 5s an evo for 3. It's literally that simple. I think, like, I get it from a balancing perspective based on, like, your usual templating on how Digimon function. I think that apps, the way that they're set up, they should be able to break that convention to have their level 5s evo for 3, so that way you have the opportunity to either basically evolve for 1 less utilizing linking and the app fuse mechanic, or you're just not punished for not having that. And I think, like, that's a big thing on what's holding apps back. It's actually, like, their number 1 issue when it comes to how apps function as a whole. So I get what Bandai's going for, but unfortunately they played things a little too safe, and as a result it just made apps a lot worse as a whole, especially since the deck already is running with a lot of colors. So I think, like, part of the other big thing that they could do going forward is limit the colors being used, because we don't have precedent on what Digimon should be what colors. And because a lot of mechanics are shared between a lot of different colors, it's not like they're hard locked to a specific color playing around with a specific mechanic. Obviously, they're trying to make this a little bit more new player friendly when it comes to just trying to figure out what mechanic goes to what color. But again, they could just easily limit what the mechanics of the deck are played with, and then it's up to player creativity to be able to go outside of that if they so choose at their own risk. So limiting their colors allows us to also potentially use some of those generic cards a little bit easier to be able to shore up some of the deficiencies in what the deck is currently faced with. Then when it comes to problem number 3, I think that apps should have more open-ended app design. So that kind of just goes into what I was saying with points 1 and 2, where if they just change those, then point number 3 kind of has to change by default. So yeah, just having the apps be able to have higher flexibility, not only with themselves in the specific engine that they're going for based on the level 6, but to be able to spread out and be able to customize apps based on the mechanics that that specific Appmon is working with, that we can try to utilize. That whole aspect would be better and easier if points 1 and 2 actually were fixed. And then when it comes to point number 4, apps could totally have inheritable effects. I don't see a reason why they couldn't. So when it comes to where and how they can implement them, so I think, like, based on app designs, you're obviously not going to be putting on anything with app fuse, because that's the whole point. That's the payoff. And then the fact that the linked cards then become its inheritables also should incentivize, there really should be an inheritable ability for that app fused Digimon to be able to use. So I think limiting them to level 4s and below probably is fine. So that's just a couple of quick examples based on the problems that I outlined on what Bandai could do to try to alleviate some of the issues that Appmon is having so that they actually could be somewhat playable decks. And on top of all of that, they also could just make more generic app tools that are acting like the generic tools that every other deck gets. So what we have is fine, but obviously more would be helpful, and better ones would also be helpful. And I kind of built this really weird and janky custom Appmon deck to kind of just showcase everything that I've been talking about when it comes to the problems and the potential fixes. So obviously I'm not going to be going over the deck card by card in great detail. just know that this is a playable deck. It's probably not the best way to play apps, nor does it make apps good as a whole. So when it comes to the deck, obviously we're going to have a level 6 Digimon that the deck is going to be based around. We're obviously going to try to capitalize on its mechanics. It would be nice if our level 5s were able to app fuse, but this is why having a normal Digivolution cost is actually for the betterment of apps as a whole. And that's kind of why Stellamon is not only just in this deck, but just the highlight and showcase card, because it is currently the only Appmon that can Digivolve for 3. Yes, it actually can Digivolve for 3 off of scope specifically, but it would be ideal if we didn't necessarily have that forced synergy, and a level 5 would just be able to Digivolve generically on top of any app for the cost of 3, so that way we're not punished again for not having app links. And then this way, it actually allows us to have a flexible level 4 slot while also running the 2 primary cards we're going to be utilizing to capitalize on our primary app link. So that way we have even more flexibility on if we're going to be app linking or if we're going to be digivolving. So that way we have different avenues to be able to capitalize on different situations, and we're again just never really punished for not having something, which is currently the biggest problem and flaw with apps, is if you don't have something, you're obviously going to be punished for it. And I guess like that's true to the extent with a lot of normal decks, but doubly so for apps, because app fuse kind of functions similar to DNA, where we do need to see fundamentally more cards than the average deck, and with apps having less consistency than the average deck, that again just all feeds into itself. So again, this deck is also trying to fix some of that in of itself, but it would be nice if it just did it natively for us, so that way we have the flexibility and freedom to be able to play various other cards. So let's just say, for the sake of this example, Scopemon was the card that was able to app fuse, then we're just kind of forced to run the level 3s that are going to be coinciding with it. But if we don't, then again, we're not really punished because it would have a normal Digivolution cost. And even if it was a 3 Digivolution cost, it wouldn't be that bad if we actually had inheritables to play with, because the way kind of like Scopemon functions would benefit from having an inheritable with an Appmon, so that way we could gain even more value off of what a card like Scopemon could be doing. So that's again kind of just feeding into where inheritables would be coming up in terms of how to make Appmon even better. And the designs of Warp and Weather also play into why they could have inheritable abilities, because again, let's just say we were able to use Warp and Weather to go into a Comet. These turn from links into inheritables, or a link into an inheritable, so that way when Comet ends up utilizing its ability to link with something potentially from its sources or trash, the fact that there's still a card underneath it means that that could be an inheritable for us to gain benefit off of while waiting for it to turn into a potential link as well, based on our level 6 or any other card that's able to pull that source to be a linked card. And because we could trim the fat in this type of a manner, not only just because we have higher levels of color consistency, but because of the fact that now we're not mandatorily forced to run extra additional cards, we could use those card slots to put in more consistency tools to be able to try to optimize the deck a little bit better. So hopefully this kind of showcases everything that I've been talking about in deck form, and if you really want to, feel free to leave in the comments below if you want me to actually cover this deck and the madness behind all of these specific cards in of itself. Alright, so I know I talked your ear off at this point all about Appmon, from what are Appmon, to the mechanics involving Appmon, to the general basis of Appmon deck building, on top of the issues that Appmon is facing, and the potential solutions to how to fix some of those issues. So that's just a lot of content and a lot of information taken all at once, so I do apologize for that. But as far as my overall final thoughts to kind of wrap things up and bring it home, I really do like Appmon. I was a big defender and advocate for Appmon being in the TCG, and I'm really glad that we actually do have Appmon, because what they are offering is a lot of potential. It's just unfortunate that right now, the current iteration of what Appmon are doing, it's just a lot of wasted potential. And it really hurts my heart seeing something that I really wanted into the game actually get into the game, and for it to be as half-baked as what it currently is. And I think that just stems from, right now, apps being really boring to build and highly inflexible while having really flexible mechanics. So it's just unfortunate to see how all of this played and panned out the way that they did. And hopefully, once they're done with all of the characters from the show and games, maybe we'll actually move on to new apps that are actually going to be able to support not only the current and existing decks, but be able to live up to the promise and potential that I've kind of highlighted that apps could have in the future. I'm not necessarily saying that's going to happen. It would be nice if it did. I'm not holding my breath on it because, come on, this is Bandai we're talking about. But regardless, I really am excited to see what Appmon is going to do and what all of the other characters that they're going to finish are going to do, but I just want Appmon to be something a little bit better. They don't have to be tier 1, but they don't have to be the bottom of the barrel either. So that's all I really have for this video. As always, feel free to tell me your thoughts about apps and anything I kind of talked about in the comments below, and thank you everyone for making it all the way to the end, listening to a guy on the internet basically yell at clouds. So, I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their day, and I hope to see you all in the next video. Later!